What's the most horrific thing that happened in your town? A woman on her way home from a Jolfro Coast, a kind of Christmas party we do in my country, where we get exceedingly drunk, was killed and dumped in the harbor. Having people go missing was very unusual, so police dispatched choppers and a huge crew. I remember a chopper hanging over my house as it was searching the fjords. It was extremely odd for something like that to happen in a town where the front page of the newspaper usually talk about the eating habits of the elderly or a new patch of apple trees being planted in the park. This sounds pretty unsettling. A Christmas party turning into something tragic is just strange. It's wild how a small town can be shaken by something like this. The police response seems intense, especially with choppers involved. It's hard to imagine such a serious situation in a place where the news is usually so light. Definitely a contrast to what usually goes on there. In our street, there was a ceramic shop owned by a Sicilian family with an industrial oven and all that type of equipment. The dad of the family went to Sicily for a few days, and when he came back, he found his only 20-year-old son burning inside the industrial oven with several nails in his skull. This was 5 years ago, and the case was never solved, and the dad turned his ceramic shop into a little supermarket. Edit. So I changed the son's age and decided to add some more info. He was found dead a day after his 20th birthday, and left his father a note letting him know that if he was found dead, he would not need to look far. His stepmother's brother and 2 close friends of his were arrested and questioned, but were released and not charged. A few months before the murder, they received photos of their missing dog tortured and dead. This is pretty unsettling. A young man found dead in such a way, and the mystery just hangs there. The note adds a strange twist, suggesting he knew something was off. It's creepy how the family had to deal with their dog's death before that, and the fact that nobody was charged leaves a lot of questions unanswered. Just a tragic situation overall. So this kid in my town, Monmouth County, NJ, was arrested for taking a bag of kittens, soaking them in gasoline, then lighting it on fire. He was not held for more than a couple hours before he got out despite desperate attempts by the local animal safety officer to hold him. The next week he walks into a bed, bath, and beyond, grabs a knife from a display, and stabs a mother shopping with her infant daughter 10 times in her back. There's been several successful and attempted murders in Middletown, but none were as avoidable as this. That's pretty disturbing. It sounds like a serious situation with a lot of negligence involved. It's hard to understand why he was released so quickly after such a violent act. It's alarming to think about how many people could be affected by someone like that. The community probably feels pretty on edge with stuff like this happening around them. There's 2 that stand out, both from my small hometown, 5,000 ppl. About 10 years ago, a group of 4 students went out at lunch. The driver was speeding and got into a wreck. He survived. The other 3 girls in the car didn't. Students haven't been allowed to leave on lunch since. As far as I'm aware, graduated about 5 years ago. The second is creepier, but no people died. About 6 or 7 years ago, a satanic cult was busted. It was a group of about a dozen 7th to 10th graders trying to be Satanists. They had been murdering cats in a spot in the woods not far from the center of town. They'd hang them up and drain the blood into buckets to use in their rituals. That's pretty heavy stuff. It's wild how events like that can change a community's routines. The speeding incident must have left quite an impact, especially for the students. Then there's the cult thing, which is just disturbing. Makes you think about what kids might get into when they're lost or looking for something. Definitely leaves a mark on a small town like that. When I was in elementary, I met one of my father's old friends. He owned this small wildlife refuge where he took care of local wildlife that were injured and he nursed them back to health for release into the wild. Most notably, he had a small pride of mountain lions that refused to leave him. He had a small amount of government funding, but worked as my elementary school's janitor to fund his family instead of using the government's money. Government money went straight to the wildlife. One night, his wife had enough of having to live off 2 minimum wage jobs instead of a government fund and shot him. She threw him into the lion's cage and called the police, claiming the lions had attacked him. She thought they would tear him apart before the police could arrive, but they protected him as he lay dying, even from the police who showed up to save him. He died about 30 minutes before they could tranquilize the lions. He has a full foundation now, dedicated to his memory and run by his mother. That's a pretty intense story. It's sad how things turned out for the wildlife refuge owner. The loyalty of those lions is kind of haunting, how they stayed with him even in such a terrible moment. It's good to hear that there's a foundation in his memory, though. At least some good came from it. While not in my neighborhood, it was very close. My father runs a fairly successful company, attracting many customers. There was one lady in particular who I saw quite often and would stop by and say hi from time to time. She genuinely seemed like a very kind person. Anyways, I live in Australia, home of infamous serial killer Ivan Milat. Yes, he went on a hunger strike for a PS3, who began murdering local backpackers. This made news headlines, where one day I watch one of the reports on TV and see her listed as murdered. Turns out she was brutally murdered by Ivan. That's pretty intense. It's unsettling when someone you know is connected to such a tragic event. Makes you think about how close these things can hit home. The fact that it was someone kind you interacted with adds a layer of shock. Sometimes the world has strange and dark stories that catch you off guard. Just a reminder of how unpredictable life can be. I think it's a tie between the Denny's blowing up close to the school because of a gas leak or the very serious bomb threat that happened in my high school my junior year. We didn't know there was a possible bomb in the school until I got a text from a friend, who was a firefighter on scene, saying that there was possibly a bomb in the school. Keep in mind, we were still inside the school for a while. They kept us inside because they were concerned about an active shooter situation. Day equals ruined edit. Obligatory, my school sucks edit 2. More of the story. We had a state trooper talking to my class in the library when they got the call. We knew something was up when they rushed him out of the room when the responding officers came on scene. He said to us, "Well, y'all are probably the safest people in the school since I'm the only one with a gun." So we thought we were going to be safe because we had a cop in our room, but when he left, we were like, The SWAT team showed up along with the ATF, DEA, FBI, and other government law enforcement and agencies. We ended up being searched, and down one of the halls, they found a kid with a couple of guns on him. They say he chickened out when all the police and first responders showed up. They never found any bombs, though. Edit 3. Keep in mind, this was a relatively smaller town in Georgia. That sounds pretty intense. It's wild how quickly things can escalate in a school. The fact that you were kept inside due to the potential for an active shooter must have been really unsettling. Seeing all those law enforcement agencies there must have added to the tension. Sounds like a crazy day to get through. Glad nothing serious happened in the end, though. Small town vibes definitely shift when something like that goes down. 9/11. No, I'm serious. I live in the New York metropolitan area, Rockland County, and a lot of people who lived in my town commuted to the city and worked in the World Trade Center. I personally knew several people who lost their lives in the towers and surrounding area, and the amount of people around town who also lost friends and loved ones that day was just horrific. Edit. If you don't think that sounds horrific, imagine 15 kids in your school losing their dad in an instant. Then imagine a bunch of firefighters and police officers from your town who volunteered at the scene being killed throughout the day. My English teacher at the time lost her husband. I'll never forget that day. It's tough hearing about such a personal experience during 9/11. The impact on the community must have been really profound. Losing friends, family, and even local heroes is hard to process. It's something that changes your perspective forever. Those kinds of events leave lasting scars, and it's important to remember and reflect on them. It's clear this day holds significant weight for you and many others. Edmonton, Canada. There are a few that come to mind. I think it was about 3 years ago at the University of Alberta. A security company responsible for taking money from ATMs was restocking the machines when one of the guys that worked for them brutally executed his 3 coworkers with shots to the head and stole all of the money. He then tried to escape to the U.S. border, but was caught. One lady just got married. The 2 others were dads, I think. Really sad and unnecessary. Another one was this year. Some guy killed 7 people in a rampage, although I'm not sure the reasons behind it. I know it was a family issue and not a random killing. Also this year, some guy on a native reserve brutally sexually assaulted a little girl and left her to die in -30-degree weather. And a cop was shot to death by some crazy anti-government fanatic this year as well, which makes it the first cop killing in 25 years. We also had a tornado in 1987 that killed 27 people. And the roller coaster in West Edmonton Mall flew off the tracks in the 80s and killed several people as well. There's a lot of violence in that story, which is pretty disturbing. It's hard to wrap your head around these events, especially when they involve innocent people. The tornado and the roller coaster incident add a different layer of tragedy. I guess it shows how unpredictable life can be. Overall, a tough situation for Edmonton, with some dark moments in its history. Escaped felon loose around my hometown when I was 5 years old. Police came to our door and told us that we need to leave the area as the fugitive was armed and considered extremely dangerous. 2 days later, the police found him. Rather than face capture, he shot himself. In my church, in my Sunday school room, on our nice leather couch. The scary part is that the church is seriously old. Lots of creaking, groaning, house noises. And the hallway leading to that Sunday school room had room doors on either side all the way down and single-windowed exit to the old grove at the end, so it was already creepy as hell. After that guy shot himself, I could never walk down that hallway without the hairs on the back of my neck standing straight up. Shudder. That's a pretty intense story. It's wild how something like that can leave such a lasting impression. I get why you'd feel uneasy walking down that hallway after what happened. It's always the old places that have that creepy vibe, especially with the noises and the layout. Makes you think about the history and everything that's happened there. Just a chilling experience overall. I had a petty drug dealer get busted right behind my house. For about a year or so, cars would pull up outside my house and park to the side of my driveway. The driver would be wearing a coat or be carrying a bag, so they wouldn't be seen with their purchase. They would then walk down a sidewalk that connects my streets with the drug dealers. After a few minutes, the person would emerge from his house, come back down the sidewalk, and drive away. These 5 to 10-minute visits were a reoccurring theme, always with different people showing up to claim their prize. My neighbors called and complained about the guy, and a fully decked SWAT team came out and raided his house. I mean, this was the full deal. They rolled up in their SWAT van, jumped out the back door with their assault rifles and SWAT uniforms and kicked his door in. I watched the entire thing transpire from my upstairs bathroom window, where I could see into his street and catch a glimpse of what happened. I heard no gunfire, so at least there was no exchange of bullets, but they dragged the guy off to prison. I think he was bailed by his uncle and now lives with him in that house. I don't know if he's tried getting back in the drug business. Now he just has his pit bull drag him around on his skateboard, and I occasionally see him on my street. Seems like you had a front row seat to some chaos. It's wild how things can happen right next door. The whole scene with the SWAT team sounds intense, but good there wasn't any gunfire. I guess it's pretty amusing now seeing him skateboarding with his dog. Life just keeps going even after that drama. Just another day in the neighborhood, I guess. I lived in a very boring town. This is the most brutal thing we've had happen. We had a series of burglaries that were stopped abruptly by a very old, very pissed off cat that lived with an equally pissed off old lady. She gave out peanuts for Halloween and yelled at kids about walking on the edge of her lawn because there was no sidewalk. Anyway, the thieves broke into her house and walked under a cabinet that the cat was on top of. The cat leapt down onto the face of one of the guys and mauled the hell out of him. Blood everywhere in the living room. When the second guy managed to get the cat off the head of the first guy, it went after the second thief and cut his arms through the fat layer. Both guys panic, run out the door, dripping blood chased by a very angry cat. Police picked them up at the local ER, getting lots of stitches. Cat continued to terrorize dogs in the neighborhood. Old lady continued to give out peanuts. That's my town. This is an interesting story. Sounds like that cat is the real hero of the town. It's funny how something so small can create such chaos. The old lady seems tough too, giving out peanuts and keeping up with her angry cat. Definitely not your typical burglary response. The police probably got a good laugh when they found those guys. It's a wild twist for a boring town. I went to school in the south part of Dublin. One day a girl didn't show up for class. She was 8. I was 9 at the time, one class above her. By midday, there was a lot of concern over the lack of contact from either parent, so the police were called. An officer went over to the house with the aunt. They found both the mother and daughter in their beds after being bludgeoned to death with a hatchet. The father had killed both of them the night before, and then killed himself by throwing himself under the wheels of a large truck. His body was not identified due to the extent of his injuries until after his family's body was buried. A few years later, the aunt killed herself in the house. She had never really recovered from the death of her sister. That's a pretty heavy story. It definitely has a dark turn with all the loss. Seeing how the aunt struggled after her sister's death shows how deep trauma can run. It's tough to think about the impact of such events on a community. It's a reminder of how fragile life can be and how people deal with grief in different ways.